And so I think we can begin our proceedings. Am I too loud for you? No? Okay, good. People say that of me all the time. So I'd like to welcome you all to the first meeting of a new era for AOI of DC. It is our first mixed meeting. It's virtual and it's in person. And it's our first meeting here at this beautiful venue, the Women's National Democratic Club. As I say, this is our first meeting of the 156th year, and it's the first in-person meeting since February 2020, which is kind of a sobering thought. It's a first, this meeting, but it's one of many firsts. When we met in February of 2020 to learn about the Casey Trees program, who could have predicted the events of the next 21 months? And like so many American institutions, members of AOI of DC have found ourselves coping with the disaster of unprecedented proportions. And of course, our first thoughts were with our family and friends, but many of us wondered, and especially members of this organization, wondered and worried whether we had seen our best days or maybe even our last days. And as the Duke of Wellington said after the Battle of Waterloo, it was a damn close run thing. During the grim days of citywide shutdowns, the board of directors did continue to meet, socially distanced and masked, and we were considering a future for the organization, a future that seemed uncertain at best. Our carefully chosen programs for the 2020 spring meetings had to be put on hold. And the good old Capitol Skyline Hotel, our meeting place since 2014, and it succeeded the even better old Channel Inn that many of us will remember, was leased by the district government for potential use as a quarantine facility for people who might be have COVID positive. And of course, large group meetings of any sort were banned. But as I say, the board continued to meet, and the association was not inactive during this period. Progress was being made on a couple of projects that are close to our heart. This coming spring in 2022, AOI memorial gravestones will be placed for 4 women, 1 plaque and 3 gravestones, for 4 women who served in the US Navy during World War II. And World War I, thank you. They had received no recognition, and 2 of the people, these ladies, did not even have any markers on their graves in Congressional Cemetery. Well, thanks to our members, all of our members, and I want to shout out to Maggie Hobbs here because she worked on this a long time. We will be putting in, come spring, these very handsome flat stones that list the name, the service that they worked in, and part of the design includes a bas-relief poppy cut into the gray granite stone, which of course we recall World War I in Flanders Fields, the poppies grow. So congratulations to Maggie and all the people who helped with that. Now, and another project that continued apace during the shutdown was a memorial to a city recognition of World War I that I don't think any of us were aware of. In 1921, a row of Norway maples was planted from, Barbara Bates, help me, which cross streets were those? Alaska Avenue to Varnum Street, to commemorate that. And they all had plaques. All the plaques but one have disappeared, and most of the trees have disappeared. Norway maples do not last as long as redwoods. But AOI has managed to secure permission to place an interpretive marker near the northern end of this row of trees, which would be near Varnum Street. And we're working on that now. And as anyone who has done work with our local government knows, the wheels of progress at the district building grind slowly. But we are working on that. And I think Barbara Bates, who has been our lead person on all of our really extraordinary World War I commemorative activities, deserves a great deal of applause for that. And I see Barbara is here today. Now, as the pandemic stretched on, the board voted, after some serious study and I think soul searching as well, to sponsor a survey of our members to see what they felt about this organization. Should it continue? How should it continue? How are you, to what extent are you committed to the organization? Are you willing to reach out and provide, as we used to say, your time, talent, and treasure? Certainly not your treasure, because our dues are cheap. But, and I must say, when the results came in, they were very gratifying, profoundly gratifying. First of all, we had a very high rate of response, which I believe Hewlett will tell me 40%, which is extremely unusual if you're in the survey business. So we had a very high percentage of our members responded. And a lot of people just didn't check the box. They also wrote in comments, some of which were critical and some of which were very helpful, but all of which were welcome because it indicated a degree of interest on the part of the members. And the continued support that people voiced. And even more gratifying, a number of respondents expressed their willingness to help keep the group alive and thriving. And since then, on March 26th, and again on September 2nd, the association held its first successful Zoom meetings of the membership. More firsts for this venerable organization. And from these meetings emerged a viable way forward for the Association of Oldest Inhabitants, the election of new officers and directors, and certainly the most important action we have taken as an organization since the sesquicentennial grants of 2015, and that is the members voted to establish the Legacy Endowment, which will provide sustained and substantial financial grant assistance to the Committee of 100 on the Federal City and DC History, AKA the Historical Society of Washington, DC, for years to come. 2 more groundbreaking firsts, and I can tell you that they are very much appreciated by the recipient organizations. So now we're setting another precedent for this venerable organization as we resume our luncheon meetings, now both in physical and online formats. And we're particularly fortunate to be meeting here at the Women's National Democratic Club. As I said before, it's a magnificent building, and we express our thanks to the members, and particularly to Rick Marino, who is our secretary, who is also the manager of this beautiful facility, and another delicious meal. And Washington history buffs. At our table, we were talking a little about the right to vote in Washington, D.C., but our history buffs may note that one of the founders of the Women's National Democratic Club was Daisy Harriman, a cousin of Averill of that ilk. And Daisy Harriman was a tireless advocate for voting rights and representation in the District of Columbia. And our historian, Nelson Ryman-Snyder, will be pleased to know that at age 84, Daisy Harriman marched at a parade which called for an end to Washington's taxation without representation. So against this background, let's talk a little bit about routine business before we have our distinguished speaker. And first of all, virtual minutes. I will entertain a motion to approve the video record of the proceedings of the association's September 2nd hybrid meeting, and that recording will serve as the official account of the meeting for the AOI archives, which will be deposited also with the Historical Society papers. So I will entertain a motion to approve. I see a motion to approve. I don't know who that is. Okay, will our secretary record that? May I have a second? And a second here from Vicky. And so all in favor? The ayes appear to have it. Second, our second item of business this afternoon is routine business, is the treasurer's report. And I'll ask Carolyn Michelle to give us a brief report. Would you like to come up, Carolyn?
Well, given that we didn't collect dues during our hiatus, there isn't much to report besides paying the routine expenses to keep the organization going, and in the establishment of the legacy fund that we will use to send money to the Washington Historical Society and the Committee of 100. Members, we have approximately 7 new members since the September meeting, and I encourage everybody, all the current members, to recruit new members so we can keep this organization going. And we voted in the last Board of Directors meeting to keep the dues at the same level this year, for this year of 2022. So the dues will be $20, continue to be $20. Pending change, things coming in the future. So I think that's it.
Questions for Carol? Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
May I have a vote to approve the treasurer's report, or a motion to approve the treasurer's report? So moved. Second? Second from the front table, another front table. All in favor? Aye. Now next, the lifeblood of this organization, new members. And Carolyn is going to take the podium again to announce the names of our new members who are being presented for your approval today. Would you like to, you recruited them, did you not? Okay, not everyone is here. So, well, we'll read the names. The first is Ms. Evelyn Ford, who is a native Washingtonian, and she turns 100 years of age on November 30th. She was an alumna of Cardozo High School, which, as we know, is one of the 3 historically African-American high schools in the city of Washington. And she worked for the War Department during WW2 and eventually worked for the Civil Aeronautics Board until her retirement in 1984. Next is Ms. Patricia Ford Neal, same name. Evelyn Ford's daughter, born in Washington. She's a retired teacher from 1967 from McKinley Tech. She's a McKinley Tech alum, excuse me. So that's Ms. Patricia Ford Neal. Ms. Clarissa Bowie, who is the daughter of Clinton Chapman. She works at Sidwell Friends up on Wisconsin Avenue, where they're building the biggest development I've ever seen across the street. And she is a 1969 alumna of Calvin Coolidge High School. And Ms. Carol Keene, 5th generation Washingtonian. She's a graphic designer, designed DC Heritage Trail signs. And those of you who have seen them, I think they're very impressive. We want more, and even more of our story as a community. And she's the niece of the former AOI treasurer, Dr. Steve Hopkins, and she's a 1977 alumna of Woodrow Wilson High School. So as I said, these members are all sponsored by Carolyn. So I will now entertain a vote to approve these new members of the Association of Oldest Inhabitants of the District of Columbia. Okay, second? Second at the front table again. All in favor? Aye. So welcome to our new members. Clarissa is here, I know that. We're happy to have you. Now, the obverse, the reverse side of new members are milestones when we lose members. And we have lost members over the past year and a half. We'll just pay a brief tribute to them. And you can see Larry Beaver, who died in February. He's a longtime resident of the Palisades. We take that back. Next, Richard Drexler. Richard died in February of 2021. He was a patent attorney. He was known for his creative musical productions for children and adults. Mr. John Hurley died on May 7th, 2021. Jack was an expert on the history of Washington's Roman Catholic community. Clinton Chapman, who died in June of 2021, and he's Carolyn Michelle's father and Clarissa's father as well, former president of the Industrial Bank of Washington and a Historical Society of Washington trustee. And as we all know, Industrial Bank of Washington is one of our historically African-American institutions, which filled an important role for our community when other banks would not. So they are always to be appreciated for that. Joan Gibala, who died in July. Bill Brown's cousin. Bill's related to a lot of people. He discovered Joan through Ancestry.com and doing research. And finally, Darwina Neal, we share the same name, although we are not relatives. Darwina was a landscape architect early on in her career. She was an assistant to Lady Bird Johnson and developing many of the flower beds, flowering places that you see along the river, near the tidal basin. A lot of Lady Bird Johnson's initiative for Plant for a More Beautiful America. And Darwina was also the first woman who was elected president of the Landscape Architects Professional Association in the United States, and a dear friend of mine. So we mourn all their passing, and we appreciate the contributions they made to our community and their membership in this organization. Now, another part of our meetings, regular part of our meetings, and I hope Nelson is ready to step up. Nelson Ryman Snyder, as all of us who are long-term members know, is our distinguished historian. He was the historian of the House District of Columbia Committee for more than 20 years. And before that, he and his lovely wife, Lisa, and I worked together when we were children at the Library of Congress. Nelson is going to come and give us his trivia quiz today on Washington, D.C. facts and fables.
Are there any prizes?
There are always prizes.
Oh yes, we get a reward. This is actually a trivia question that involves this organization, and it's okay. It involves this organization indirectly, and another organization, the Association of Oldest Inhabitants Colored Ink. And I'll get to that after we do the trivia question of how they're connected with this trivia question. The question is, name the first president of the United States who in his first State of the Union address proposed and asked Congress to pass a resolution to amend the Constitution to give the residents of the District of Columbia the vote in the Electoral College for president and to be represented in the House of Representatives as though we were a state. That's the question. I thought I would go through the alphabet, A, B, C, D, of your first name. We'll try that. And I guess I should give you one clue. It's a 20th century president. No, Roosevelt. Are you A, B, C, D? A, B, C, D answers first. You got it, Carl. Oh, no. In the 50s, when this was going through this Congress, on the House side, this organization appeared along with the Association of Homeless Inhabitants Colored Ink to testify in support of this resolution. And as a little side story, in Pennsylvania in 1960, I was a senior in high school. 1960. And we had a Problems of Democracy course, and we had to pick a subject. And I picked amending the Constitution. Now what the process was involved there. Teacher said, oh, well, this is great. There's an amendment going to the states, through the states, to give the District of Columbia the right to vote for president. And why don't you contact the League of Women Voters and consider testifying on this issue before the Pennsylvania legislature? I did that. I got an A in the course and went to Harrisburg and met my state senator, who was a Democrat, and my representative, who was a Republican, and asked them to vote for it. They said they would. Pennsylvania became the 23rd state to pass what became the 23rd Amendment. At that time, 36 states were required. So that's my little connection to all of this, and the connection of the AOI and AOI Inc. To this issue. So Carl, I don't know, do you want to pass it on to somebody else, Carl? Do you really want this? It's very good stings. Here you go. And if anybody wants to know a little bit of the history of this event, of this 23rd Amendment, and the fact that what happened it got through the House, it got through the Senate twice, the whole amendment. It couldn't get through the House. The Southern Democrats just, at that time, really ran the House. Kept it out, so we only got the vote for president. But maybe it'll be revived. Maybe we can get the other half of what I call the Eisenhower-Bush Amendment, because Prescott Bush, the Republican senator from Connecticut, got it through the Senate twice. The father of presidents and vice presidents. And so I call it the Eisenhower-Bush Amendment. Maybe it'll take off. If you like a copy of this, let me know. And Carl, I'll deliver this to you personally.
Thank you. Thank you, Nelson. Now I have the honor to introduce the main event today, and it's a pleasure to do so, introducing Dr. Frank Smith, who is our distinguished guest speaker. Dr. Smith is a native of Georgia, but he's made Washington, D.C. his home for, more than 40 years, I believe, like many of us. After attending Morehouse College, he worked in the civil rights movement, present at the creation during that critical time when African Americans and all people of goodwill fought for voting rights, civil rights, the right to be respected and honored by their fellow citizens. Dr. Smith made Washington his home in the early 1970s. He was elected to the Board of Education and then served 4 distinguished terms on the Council of the District of Columbia. After stepping down from the council, Dr. Smith focused on his passion, which is African American history, and found funding to build the African American Civil War Memorial, which I believe is at Vermont and O. Oh, Vermont and You. It's an extraordinarily handsome and very moving, if you go there, it will touch your heart, memorial. And he also established the nonprofit organization that supports the African American Civil War Museum. And I'm sure Dr. Smith will give you more information on that, including how you can also support the museum. And he's the founding executive director and board member of the African American Civil War Museum Freedom Foundation, Memorial Freedom Foundation and Museum. Thanks for coming today, Dr. Smith, and please, we're looking forward to your talk.
Yay!
How you doing? Good to see you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's good to be with people in my own age group. I enjoy working at the museum, but most of our audience, as you probably would imagine, is young people. And I have my fun with them at times. They also have their fun with me, too. So, but when I'm with the Association of Oldest Inhabitants, I know I'm with people who know how to understand what's going on in the world. Before I start my presentation, let me say thank you to a couple of people who are here. Pat Tyson, who runs our ladies group at the African American Civil War Museum, who is, she usually wears a uniform, so if you aren't careful, Pat will recruit you into one of those dresses that tells the story of women who were involved in the Civil War. We love her. She's been with us for so many years now. And I also want to say hello to Brenda Pascal. I understand she's watching this, although she can't be here today. She and I have known each other for many years. Her husband, Paul, supported us through many things. And I think I still bank with her son. One of our sons banks right now. So they've been friends for a long time. And I want to say hello to her. I understand she's not feeling well. So hopefully I'll say something today that'll cheer you up a little bit as I talk here. I am the founding director of the African American Civil War Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and I first heard about these soldiers when I was in Mississippi in the Civil Rights Movement. As you heard, I was at Morehouse College for 3 years there in the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement, and when I decided to leave school and go full-time to the Civil Rights Movement, we sat down and picked out what we call black belt counties, where African Americans were a majority of the population. I was sent to Holly Springs, Mississippi, in the north part of the state, borders against against Tennessee, state of Tennessee. And I met a man there named Henry Reeves, and Mr. Reeves had his grandfather's rifle in his uniform. And he told me a story about his grandfather, who had been a soldier in the Civil War. Yeah. Now, I knew before I went to Holly Springs, Marshall County, that there had been an African-American sheriff in Marshall County during Reconstruction. I knew there had been a black mayor. I never heard about these black soldiers. And so it was an interesting revelation to see a man tell me a story about a time when African-Americans put on these Union uniforms, walk out on these battlefields, help the Union win this war. And this man had come back home and his family got 40 acres and a mule through that process. And by the time I met him, he had over 200 acres. He'd done pretty well. He took his 40 acres and multiplied it, and he was doing pretty well. He was a gentleman farmer. And he was and he was also, by the way, the leader of the NAACP. He sought me out because he heard that some, quote, freedom riders had come to town and that we were going to enliven this movement. We were going to step this thing up a little bit. And so he came over to meet with me, and in the process of getting to know each other, he told me the story. And of course, I first saw that rifle and uniform. And I didn't know then that about 40 years later, I'd be in Washington, D.C., and able to build a monument to these soldiers and to the cause for which they fought. But as I get a little older and my Alzheimer's began to kick in, I'm going to tell people that I knew then, 40 years ago, when I was standing on that cotton row in Mississippi looking out at the evening sun, that one day I'd be a councilman in Washington, D.C., I'd build a monument to these soldiers, I'd put it up at U Street Northwest, and people would come from all over the world to see it. But I ain't old enough to start lying like that right now. Carl, I need a couple more years to get but I'm practicing. I'm practicing. And I guess in a way you could say I started then because I started reading about these foot soldiers and writing about them and thinking about them. And many years later as a council member, when I was, it became my task to try to help rebuild U Street after it had been destroyed by the riots of 1968 when Dr. King was killed, I thought about this idea of building a monument. So I talked to my group about this and we came with this idea of building something here. Washington, D.C. gets over 20 million tourists a year. They spend billions of dollars in Washington. They just spend it all downtown. Very little of it gets into our communities. And so we said, okay, if we can find a way to get these people a couple more miles up the road here to U Street, spend one more day in this town, spend some money in our businesses and our establishments here, this neighborhood can grow and prosper the same as downtown grows and prospers. So if you want to do something like that, you got to find something they can't see anywhere else, something they can't find anywhere else, and then you got to put it up somewhere so it's stable, wind won't blow it over, and the hoodlums don't tear it up. You got to put it up somewhere so it's stable, and then you got to make the neighborhood clean and safe. Because if you don't make it clean and safe, the tourists won't come. And if you make it clean and safe for the tourists, you make it clean and safe for the residents also. So once you get this sort of worked on a little bit here, you know what I'm saying, and you get everybody organized right, they start thinking the right way, you can build a monument then, a national monument. So we go to the National Archives, we pull out 209,145 names from the official records of the archives. We put those names up by regiment in alphabetical order, 209,000 names. And last week we paid tribute to General Colin Powell, who came to us on that fateful day in 1998 and did a review of our troops. We have the iconic photograph of him reviewing the troops. And last week we took that photograph and called back everybody that we could find who was in that photograph at that time to pay a special tribute to him for Veterans Day this year, because he was a good person who came he looked out and saw the value of what we were doing and lent his great name at that time as the highest ranking African American in the military to pay tribute to these people on whose shoulders he stood as the leader of the American military at the time. So thank you very much, General Powell, for believing in us. So we got the monument up, and then of course people started to come to us with stories about their soldiers, because although the history had not valued these names, the history books had not, the songs and the stories and the music and the narrations had not valued these names, the family members had, and Henry Reed was an example. These family members had valued these names. They kept these stories. And so although nobody else seemed to care about them, the family cared, as you would imagine. And so they kept the records, the documents, the letters, the photographs. They kept the stories in their hearts. And I guess they knew one day somebody was going to do something to honor these soldiers. And so this is one of those unanticipated consequences. I hadn't thought much about this idea, that people like Henry Reeves would want to come to Washington, D.C., walk up to a monument and look at their great-great-grandfather's name. And for many of these people, there are no grave sites for these soldiers. Many of them were buried in mass graves, or they were buried in cemeteries behind churches that no longer exist. So the only place in the world that bears tribute to the fact that they had served is at this monument. And this is true not only for 200,000 African Americans, it's also true for the 7,800 white officers who led these troops. And so let me give you one example of sort of a humorous example of something that happened. I had a lady came there one time. You know, the monument sits there where the subway stop is. It's oriented around the subway stop. We're the only monument that have the subway stop named for us. And some advantage of being on the council and being a member of the Metro Board, you know, you can get some things done that other people can't get done. And so she came to Washington for a conference. She was a descendant of one of the white officers. And she came to Washington for a conference, and I never saw this lady. But she wrote me a letter when she got back home. She said, "Mr. Smith, I want to thank you for building this monument up there." She said, "I didn't know what to expect, but I came to Washington for a conference, and I didn't get there till late. The museum was closed. But I just want you to know, when I took that elevator and I came up out of that escalator, and this monument rose up before me," she said, "I stood there and cried. I stood there and cried." I never met this lady. I'm reading her letter. I'm almost tearing up reading her letter. But she said, just to think that somebody would build a monument to my great-great-grandfather. So for her, it was her monument. It wasn't the other 209,000 names. It was her monument. It was all she really thought about, and it made her trip worthwhile. And so I want to say thank you to that lady. Every time I get an opportunity, I say thank you to her. So it's a wonderful thing that we're able to do here to get this monument up and get it up in time. And let me just say that I believe, and I'm sure there are other people in this room who share this, that the African American Civil War Memorial has changed the narrative for teaching about the American Civil War. Up until we built this monument, people ignored the names of these African American soldiers. Once we put 209,000 names up out in the public, that come from they're backed up by records from the Department of at the National Archives, historians now have to explain why they ignored these people all this time. It's not my job to explain why. People ask me, why didn't they know about this? Go ask these historians. They wrote the books. How could you do all this research, talk about all these things that happened in this most pivotal war in the history of this country, and ignore the fact that Lincoln had to turn to these African American soldiers? Of the 200,000, 150,000 of them were enslaved when the war started. They were living in these states from Virginia to Texas. They put on these uniforms and marched out on these battlefields. And let me say, you all, there came a time during the Civil Rights Movement when I knew that something was going to happen in America that was worthwhile. So I'll tell you about my moment. I came to Mississippi here in 1963 for the March on Washington. I just got out of jail in Greenwood, Mississippi. And I was in jail in June of that year for trying to register people to vote. When I got out, they told me I could have a little R&R. So my R&R was I could come to Washington for the March on Washington. And so I came up here, and I stood out and looked at this crowd. Now, the record said it was 250,000 people. It looked like 1 million people to me. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I never was good at math, but I'll tell you this. It was the biggest crowd I had ever seen in my life. And I said, America cannot ignore all of these people. So yes, we had some time when we felt pretty good about ourselves, but I can't imagine what it must have felt like for one of these soldiers who've been mistreated for all this time to be told by President Lincoln and the Union Army they could put on one of these uniforms, walk out on these battlefields like Henry Reeves' great-great-grandparents and do something to help themselves. It must have been a thrilling moment for them. They must have thought they died and went to heaven, and there were some times when they thought they didn't want to wake up because they were living a dream. So it was really a moment for them, and it probably was a moment that was necessary because they people had been enslaved in this country for almost 250 years, had been mistreated in such a way and told they were not much good, bought and sold, traded, all kinds of things that happened to them. And for them now to be able to do something to help themselves that they knew was going to help them. And then to have the country stand behind them with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that enabled them to not only become citizens, to get their freedom, become citizens, but also to be able to vote here in this country. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of story in my last 3 minutes here before I sit down. I'm going to take a little risk, but you know, I'm old enough now, so if y'all don't like what I say, y'all don't have to invite me back. And I get Social Security and retirement now, so I'm set. My children are all grown, they all finished college. All grandchildren finished up too, and they got money. I got money set up for them right now, so I'm gonna tell you this little piece. I'm working on something. I want you to help me with it. This is something that old people have to do for young people. Somebody approached me with this idea the other day that African Americans, that we ought to claim the American flag. Actually, what they said was, we ought to take our flag back. They said, we ought to take our flag back. Now, for an African American who was born in Georgia, grew up during the days of segregation, rode the back of the bus, you know, I feel sometimes like Denzel Washington at the beginning of that movie, Glory. You know, when they asked Denzel if he's going to carry the flag, he said, that flag never meant anything to me. Why should I carry that flag? That flag flew for all these years over a constitution that recognized slavery. Why should I? What's all the chance you got to get rid of it? So here's what I have to say to people like Denzel, and not him personally, but the people who think that way. African Americans and their white allies redeemed that flag of slavery in the Civil War with our blood and our sweat and our faith. Because remember, we entered this war at a time when Lincoln really was losing, which is the reason why he brought us in the first place. And we certainly know he was going to win. But if we knew if we didn't win, we wouldn't be any worse off. And if we did win, something good was going to happen. So people join up in mass to join the war. So I'm going to argue that we redeemed it of slavery during the Civil War. And then you know what happened after that. We get Jim Crow. And then in 1896, there's a Supreme Court decision where the court says that interpreting the 14th Amendment now in Plessy versus Ferguson says, and I want you to, I went back and read these words, by the way, you all. One of the things, I had time to do this during the pandemic. So I went back and read the words of this Plessy versus Ferguson decision, because I've been saying this for years. I wasn't sure I was quoting it accurately. But in that court decision, the court says, the framers of the 14th Amendment intended to provide absolute political equality. It uses the word absolute. Now, I got a PhD in planning. I'm not a grammatician, but absolute is a very interesting word. It says the court intended to, he said the framers of this, the people who wrote this amendment, their interpretation is 1896, intended to provide absolute political equality. And then they say you can have that in a separate but equal society. That's what they said. So we go from slavery to Jim Crow, and now the court is saying, let's try this. Now, I was born during this period. I was born in 1942. So I was born in the period of Jim Crow, separate but equal, in Georgia. I had to walk to school while white kids rode to school. They took my dad's tax money. Yeah, he had to, when he bought something, he had to pay sales tax just like white people did. He worked, he had to pay income tax like everybody else. That's right. They owned a little property, he had to pay property tax. They were just taking our tax money, using tax money for buses for white kids. I walked to school. I know they had a bus because they passed me every day on the way to school. I know a school bus when I see one. Sometimes they try to run us over. It was separate, but it wasn't equal. Not only was it separate and not equal, but any white person could enforce segregation. They could put a hood on at night in the Ku Klux Klan and go out and burn down houses, and nobody would ever arrest any of them. And if they arrested them and brought them to trial, they were found not guilty. That's right. I play the Emmett Till tape all the time at the African American Civil War Museum. So it took the civil rights movement of the 1960s to redeem the Constitution of Jim Crow. And we played our life, we played with our blood for that too. Dr. King was killed, that's right. Swarna Goodman and Cheney were killed, that's right. Paolo Liuzzo. Those of you from here, from All Souls Church, know Reverend James Reeb. The only two people killed during the Selma to Montgomery March were white people. James Reeb and Paolo Liuzzo. Yes, white people gave their lives too to help us redeem this flag. So people said to me, we ought to take our flag back. So why are they talking about taking it back? Because of that awful incident that happened at the US Capitol on January 6th. Somebody took down the American flag and put up that other flag. So somebody got to say something. And maybe African Americans have got to lead this fight. It means a lot to us. It may mean more to us. It may be more to us. So we've got to find a way to talk about this. Why is it a moment of crisis? Not just because of what happened at the Capitol, but the crisis for me is being brought on by what's happening in these state capitals, where they're rolling back these voting rights laws all over the place, including my home state of Georgia. Some of the worst laws now are coming out of Georgia, and some of them out of the northern states too, out of these southern states. Voting, you all, is the only way. Voting is what makes all men and women equal. That's what makes us equal. That's what makes us equal, it's the right to vote. In many of these southern states, in my home state of Georgia, everybody gets elected. The sheriff gets elected, the mayor gets elected, the prosecutors get elected. DC, we don't know anything about this. They elect the prosecutors, they elect school board members. Everybody gets elected, dog catchers get elected. If you can't vote, you can't do, and let me tell you something else. The jury pool is made up of voter registration rolls. So how in the world could you ever have a jury of your peers if none of your peers can vote? You can never have a fair trial. I would argue that black people in America probably never had, most of us never had a fair trial, because we never had a jury judge us that was a jury of our peers. So the right to vote is sacred, you all. So it's not just the flag, the fact that they desecrated the US Congress by running over that place up there with the flag and doing all of this. It's the fact that they're trying to take away our precious right to vote. And let me say, I've heard some of these people say this. They say, when we talk about the Constitution, we're talking about the Constitution without the amendments. Well. You got to pay attention now. If you take away amendments, the women don't have the right to vote. They get to you all before they get to us. They get to women before they get to us, right? Hey, we better stick together here, or we might not, nobody, we may all we may all, Dr. King said, we may all live as wise people and may die as fools. But hey, they don't like the result. So they're trying to change the process that gets you this result. And so on that point, I believe there is a crisis pending. Because let's go back at the end of our exhibit at the African American Civil War Museum, we talk about those two amendments that get passed during the Civil Rights Movement, the 64 Voting Rights Act and the 64 Civil Rights Act that bans discrimination in employment, and the 65 Voting Rights Act that are both appended to those Reconstruction amendments. Those two acts are acts that really are the result of the March on Washington, the 7th of Montgomery March, the demonstration we had at the Atlantic City Democratic Convention, where we brought the Mississippi Democratic Party up and went face to face with the Democratic Party, which wouldn't seat us, should have thrown out those racists and put in this worthy group of people who are facing danger every day in Mississippi. We were the real Americans and the real voters. They should have seated us, didn't seat us, but they sent us back home with the promise that they were going to pass the 65 Voting Rights Act, which did get passed too, by the way, the next year. So, and that act made a difference. When I went to Mississippi, there were only 5,000 blacks registered to vote. When I left in 1968, there was 100,000 African Americans registered to vote. You go back to Mississippi today, the mayor, every major city in Mississippi is African American. The mayor of Jackson, a man whose last name is Lumumba or something like that. I can't even say his name. And his dad was the mayor before him. So voting makes a difference, you all. And if they take away our right to vote, we don't have a chance here in this country. And what makes America the land that it is, that land of promise that everybody cares about and people from all over the world are trying to get to, is the fact that they believe those words that were in that preamble to the Constitution, that all men are created equal. And we're all endowed by a creator with certain inalienable rights, among those of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so it's time for us to reclaim our flag. I want you to help me with this. We got one more good fight left in us. I can look at you and tell every one of you got one more good fight left in you. We got one more good march left in us, one more good flag waving that we can do in us to save this country, to save this precious right to vote. Because when we hold this flag up around the world, people look at it and they think they see something special. Because America has been something special. It could elect a man like Barack Obama president, not once but twice. And if we can do that, you all, we can save this precious democracy and we can save our right to vote. May God continue to bless all of you, and may God continue to bless America. Thank you.
Don't go away. AOI does not present an honorarium generally to our speakers, but I'm very happy today to offer this certificate of appreciation to Dr. Frank Smith for your presentation pertaining to the African American Civil War Museum. Thank you. Now, don't go away. There may be some questions. Bill, who has done so much for so many years, you will see over there a microphone on the table. Could you be our mic person?
Yeah, you answer the hard questions. Pass the easy one on to me.
Like,
Testing.
questions? Yes. Please choose, since I've got the microphone.
I'm Ann Lyko, and I have
Yes, Ann.
two things. One, I wanted
Thank you
to
for
say,
your donation, too,
Oh, you're
Ann.
welcome. I wanted to say one of the best lectures I've ever heard was at the museum, explaining all the different emancipation proclamations, and I would urge you to get that taped and get it out so that we can put it on the radio and television so everybody can know it. But I have one very big correction to your speech,
Okay.
which is the District of Columbia is still a colony.
Right.
And that it's not the vote that is the important thing. The important thing is the right to self-government, our liberty, which you only get by becoming a state. And then you can exercise that right with the vote. And I would urge you every time that you give a speech to always mention the District of Columbia, the role of African Americans, of African American soldiers, and the history of the District of Columbia is absolutely phenomenal. But we have all, for 221 years, been denied every right. It's not just the right to vote, and we're substantially different from the rest of the country. And even Dr. Martin Luther King used to come and lobby LBJ for the District of Columbia because he understood the difference between being a state and not being a state and having your democratic rights. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. I'll try to remember that.
I think we see a hands up, in our audience, our virtual audience, and I'm told that we have 16 members who are watching us today, and can we, whoever's asked that question, if they, I guess they should unmic, and we can hear you.
I think that might have been a hello. I'm
Oh.
going to let that person ask a question. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I think that might have been an earlier hand to say hello. But if I am wrong, please unmute yourself and speak up.
Okay. Thank you, Cindy. This is Dr. Cindy Gwally, who is our webmaster, and who is, this is her third flawless presentation online. We're so happy to have her doing all this wonderful work for us. Now, more questions for Dr. Smith.
I have a question.
I have a question.
Somebody has the mic.
Oh. I'm not familiar with our bylaws, but since we gave you that, and if our bylaws state that we cannot, could we take up some money for the African? I don't know what the bylaw states, but is that something that we can do?
Well, we discussed that.
The people here.
I'm going to bring
the music up. We discussed that, and we thought that maybe the best thing to do is to ask Dr. Smith to let the members know how we can contribute. And
Okay.
we could contribute directly to
Okay.
museum.
Thank you. And thank you for thinking about us too. Yes, we are a tax exempt nonprofit entity, the African American Civil War Memorial Freedom Foundation. All donations to us are tax exempt. We're not a government entity. We are a private independent entity. We live on our donations and our prayers and the hard work of our staff and volunteers. So make checks payable to the African American Civil War Museum. Our address is 1925 Vermont Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C., and we'll get it. Okay?
We
Hi, Dr. Smith. I'm Andrea Seeger.
Morning.
My quick question is, have you announced an opening date for your new museum yet? And if
Okay.
not, when might you announce that date?
Okay, well, you know, I'm glad you raised that with me. We are in the process we partnered with another company to buy the Grimke building. You know, we've been in the annex for years now, 8 or 10 years. Always intended to be in the main building, but the government had offices in there. We had to boot those out first, and then we had to gut the building. We've done the exterior work to it already, and starting January, I expect to move in there with my architects and our set of drawings. We have 5 months of work to do, and if as they say, if nothing don't happen, the creek don't rise, we'll be finished with that by the middle of next year, May, June of next year, and we'll be moving in with new exhibits. And we have I'll just tell you a quick story about one of our new exhibits. When President Obama got elected, I hope you all have heard this before, but when he got elected in January of 2009, when his family came here for their family reunion, while they were here, her great uncle who lived in Michigan told one of his nieces that she should come to the African American Civil War Museum because they had a soldier whose name was on our wall. Okay, so 15 of them show up one day at the museum and tell us during the inauguration and say that they were descendants of a soldier whose name was on our wall, and they were Obama relatives, Michelle Obama's relatives. And so the staff couldn't find the name at the time because the man changed his name from one to another, which happens often. By the time I got there, they told me the story. I went berserk. I said, you know what? When the president's wife's family shows up, somebody got to do something. So I got on the phone and called out there to find this old man. I'm gonna say he's old. He was 90, so he's older than me. He told me that, he said, well, they had the wrong name. I told them they should be looking for the name Sutton. So I go back and pull up the name Sutton, and there it is. And not only his name there, but also his card, at the index card at the archive says, see also Souter. So his alias was on the card already. So we got a whole treasure trove now of stories about this family. So we're doing a special exhibit now called From Slavery to the White House. The Civil War heritage of First Lady Michelle Obama. We had a Zoom call last weekend with 20 of our family members, including one of our favorite uncles and his sister who lives out in, Obama's sister who lives in, the one that lives out the one that lives in Hawaii, yes. And they were all invited to come. We're gonna have a special opening for them in May when we open a new exhibit. We'll open first early for the family. And we hope we're gonna get Michelle here. We got one of her dresses, so if she doesn't come, we're gonna say we got a dress that's gonna be on exhibit here at our museum. So it's been a fun story for us. It's one that we tell, and we hope we can make this an American story, because this is the real story of America. People who came here against their own will, but who made something out of this country and made something out of themselves, and really added a part of a story to this great legacy of America that it needed to have in order to be able to function in this new world that we have today. Yes, sir. Somebody, there was another question.
Yeah, Dr. Smith, Howard Marks, the president of the Illinois State Society
Yes,
of
how are you,
Washington,
Howard?
D.C. It's been my pleasure to visit your museum, and looking forward to this ribbon cutting coming in May.
Right.
And also congratulations on honoring a proud daughter of Illinois,
Thank you very much.
Michelle Obama. We are so proud that you are affording her this honor, which she so richly deserves. I just wanted to ask you a question about the black soldiers and how they were treated by the Confederacy during the war. I just read in the newspaper just the other day that they uncovered the bodies, I think 7 or 8 black soldiers that were executed by the Confederacy, by Confederate soldiers, because as I understand it, that there was an order that any black soldier who was caught in a Union uniform would be subject to firing squad. There would be no prisoners of war taken. Could you comment on that? Tell us a little more about that. Thank you.
Well, we all know the story of Fort Pillow, about what happened there when after a surprise attack by the Confederates, cavalry. It was cavalry. The guy who started the Ku Klux Klan, whose name is escaping me now, but they killed a bunch of civilians as well as soldiers there who had surrendered under the white flag of surrender. The case you're talking about now is the one that was talked about in the paper about a monument that is opened down in Southern Virginia this past weekend, where they found some graves that were unmarked graves that were where people had been killed. Look, I was in the civil rights movement in Mississippi, and we used to say about the Mississippi River, when it ain't muddy, it's bloody. People would just disappear. People, if you were a known civil rights worker, your life was in danger. And I'm not talking about 1860. I'm not talking about a person in the Union uniform now who's an African American. They consider you a traitor just because you're in the uniform. And these people like the man I told you about, including First Lady Michelle Obama's family. Her father, when he got out of the military, he went back to live in the same place where he'd been enslaved. And so they knew who these people were, and then many of them became targets. And many of them, some of these states passed laws after the war was over with, where they, in South Carolina, outlawed Union muskets and required people to turn those muskets in. And then the terrorists would go house to house. And if they found a Union musket in your house, they burned the house down. So these were just gangs. These are just terrorist gangs. And so it's been a rough road for people to get to where we are now. But nobody ever said the road was going to be easy. We have songs for that. Nobody said the road was going to be easy. And thank God there are tough people who are made for tough times. And I've known some of those. Martin Luther King was one of them. Fannie Lou Hamer was one of those people. And as much as I sometimes think about my own involvement in this, the one thing I always had in the back of my head was that I was a student volunteer. And one day I was going to resume my education and go out someplace and have another life, get married and have another life. And I will say this, at that point I knew that wasn't going to happen in my home state of Georgia. That I knew, it wasn't gonna happen there. I was finished with that. And so I ended up living here in Washington, DC, which by the way.
Thank you.
It's not all that great. Oh, I
Okay.
didn't know where this was.
Okay.
So it's somewhat similar to
I'll get
Mississippi.
there, too. I'm almost finished here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Somebody's got a microphone open here. Okay, so are there any more questions? Okay, one more in the back.
I'm John Heron, and I've been here since the last ice age. I wanted to thank you so much for what you said about voting, and it brought to my ancient mind a little poem my father used to say about voting, and it was by a poet who is unfortunately no longer remembered, named John Greenleaf Whittier. He said, "Alone of all the weary year, a king of men am I. My palace is the people's hall, the ballot box, my throne."
Well, let me say, nobody's commented so far on my flag idea. We have one more hand right here. Then I want to say something else.
First of all, I just want to say how much I have admired you and your career and your past, and I still feel that way today. But
Thank you.
how do we manage getting schools to teach the truth about our history and not call it woke? That term annoys me.
Well, I said earlier that I thought that the African American Civil War Memorial had challenged the way history is being taught in America today. And I think we have changed that narrative. We changed that narrative. And that narrative takes place all over the place. Let me give you an example. The National Park Service gets 80 million tourists a year. So what park rangers say about this is important. Most of these battlefields are in Civil War parks around the country. And so we targeted this ourselves as a way to try to get at this story. And they had to take down some of those, the National Park Service had to take down some of those Confederate flags when this push started, when Black Lives Matter started pushing on this a few months ago, not that long ago. This was the federal government flying these flags. And so you had these military bases that were named for Confederate terrorists so this fight is going on, and it is having an impact already in this country. And I think we've gone too far to turn back. And let me say, the reason why I think we can take on this business about the flag, and nobody commented on this because I know nobody really want to step in the middle of a controversy here. I mean, these hooligans who are dangerous. If you got enough, to storm the United States Capitol, let's not be, they serious about this. We had when the Proud Boys came to town a few weeks ago, 6 to 8 weeks ago, they called the African American Civil War Memorial. They said, if you've taken down Robert E. Lee, we're gonna take down the African American Civil War Memorial. Not while I'm helping, not today, but so we worked with Homeland Security like everybody else. We used our network, found out who this guy was, and they put a tracer on him and stuff. Somebody from Florida who said he was coming. I don't know if he ever came or not. He certainly didn't come to our, well, we don't know if he came or not. We weren't there 24 hours a day, but it was not damaged. But I just wanted to say that we are all, those of us who believe in freedom, we have to stand up for what we believe in. There's no way for you to hide now. Because if this country turns back on African Americans, it's gonna turn back on some other people too. Because when Barack Obama got elected president of the United States, there were 18 million black people registered to vote. Obama got 56 million votes. So as quiet as it kept, African Americans didn't elect Barack Obama president. We didn't have enough votes. I got elected a few times up in Ward 1. If you got 18, you need 56. That's better. 18 is better than nothing. But you better find some more votes somewhere if you want to win. And how do you find those other votes? You have to reach across the aisle and find enough well-meaning people who are willing to judge people by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, who are willing to go out and vote for them and stand up for them. And because that's the American way. That's what we're all about. And I think that I still believe in that dream. I still believe in that hope. I still believe America is capable of that. And I've got Martin Luther King's tape in my car now, so let me just take a quick. He says the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I submit to you, we have passed that point a long time ago now, at least back in 2008. America's going in another direction. It will never turn back. It will never turn back. The price of turning back is too great. It's the destruction of our country, and we're not going to have that. Not as long as we live. Thank y'all very much. May God continue to bless you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. I'd like to thank Dr. Smith for coming today. Wonderful talk and a wonderful institution here in our city, the African American Civil War Museum and the Memorial. And I recommend if you haven't been, you should go. I hope everybody has enjoyed this first of our new format meetings. To our colleagues in the cybersphere, thanks for joining us today, and particularly thanks to Cindy Gwelly for arranging this. And I'd also, before we adjourn, I'd like to ask all our directors, past and present, just to stand for a moment. We went through a rough patch as an organization, as indeed as a country, as a people, and I was impressed with the stick-to-itiveness of our directors and our members, and the original thinking, and the courage and the willingness to serve of our new directors, who some of whom, or most of whom, are with us today. So I want you all just to stand and be acknowledged for your contributions. Please stand up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, we're still a work in progress in this organization. We hope to continue with our programs, mixed programs at this point, hybrid programs. We have a couple of other programs in the pipeline, so please remember these, and you will be informed via your newsletter in the near future. But on the December 16th, on Thursday, December 16th, we will have Mary Belcher, who will speak on A Place of Their Own Making, how African American activists created the Mount Pleasant Plains Cemetery in Mount Pleasant, which is now the location of Walter Pierce Park. But she'll be telling us the original story of this historic African American and Quaker cemeteries side by side. So mark that on your calendars. And we are hoping to go forward with a restoration of the AOI of DC New Year's Day brunch on January 1st, 2022. And that, keep your fingers crossed, as they say. I hear it from the audience, it is going to, Rick tells me it's going to happen. Right here. So. And also another point, if you enjoy these programs, go tell your friends, recruit new members. I think it's a terrific organization, and obviously all of you do. We're looking to grow following this extraordinary period in the life of our country and the life of this organization. But so if you like what you saw today, and if you like meeting with your friends, bring another friend along as a guest or introduce them as a member. You know, the qualifications for membership are age. Bill says age, shrug of shoulders. So what it requires to be a member is intellectual maturity. So, and residence for a certain period of time, and commitment to being a Washingtonian in the greater sense of the word. And so bring them on. We'd love to have more members. And so we always have membership materials available. We have copies of the brochure on the way out, as you pass on the way out. And again, special thanks to the Women's National Democratic Club and Rick Marino, who is the manager of this wonderful facility, who made this all possible. And let's give them a round of applause. So as Bill used to say, you know, as we finish meeting in February or March and the snow is starting to fall and the roads are getting slick, have a safe trip home, and we'll see you in person or online next time we meet. Thanks for coming.
Very good.
Thank you, everyone, for being on here. I hope that worked technically for everybody. Please let us know if for some reason it did not, or if there's anything else that that we can make better for next time, since this was our first experiment with doing this. I think we're going to be doing this for at least the next couple of meetings, probably through June, to make them hybrids. So the more feedback we get, the better we will get at it. And please have a safe Thanksgiving, and hopefully we will see you all in December. Bye.